Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 310 of the At Percussion podcast. Now, it is the dawn of a new age. It is the beginning of a new era. It might be the beginning of the end. We're not sure. You might be wondering, who is this new host and why am I intrigued by their voice? Yep, it's me, Caleb Pickering, the newest addition.
Yay!
The newest full-time addition to the now five-headed beast that is the At Percussion podcast, or maybe a hand, maybe the fifth finger. Now we have a complete hand. And I would be remiss if I didn't introduce our co-host today, because we're surrounded by some really cool people, and also Ben is here. So first up, Ben. Ben Charles, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, Caleb, doing well? Semester's finishing up great. How's yours going?
Oh man, I don't know what happened this finals week. Everything landed all day after day. It's been crazy.
Yeah.
And also here we have back for the first time in a hot minute is one of our regular guest hosts, Brian Nosny. How's it going down there in Louisiana?
It's cold. It's cold. Thank God it's cold. I'm so happy I had to wear a jacket today. So, and other than that, my semester's done. So I'm just chilling.
Chilling. Yeah. With those kids at home, I'm sure you're chilling. Yeah.
We traveled with them this weekend. My wife had her first gig in over a year. And so we took them both to Mobile, and it was an experience. Yeah, it's all I'll say. They were actually great. They were wonderful. But yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, nice. Well, hey, for Today in History, we are releasing on December 16th. There's actually two big birthdays that happened on this date. But in 1882, Kodai was born. And in 1770, Beethoven was actually born. I forgot he had a December birthday. But to kind of focus it in on Beethoven, I'm sure just judging by the demographics of people that listen to this podcast, we've all probably have taken or will take some sort of percussion history or pedagogy class, or even just, cursory searches on our own. I just kind of wanted to walk through a little bit of the cool percussion instruments and development Beethoven did with percussion and timpani in his writing over his career. So kind of jumping back a little bit to Janissary music, during the last quarter of the 18th century, diplomacy was beginning to replace military engagements between the Turkish armies and their European counterparts. And as a result, the Janissary Guard and the Sultan of Turkey and the bands connected with accompanied dignitaries to major centers around Western Europe. And then the bands and the instruments got a great bit of excitement and a lot of attention because they were, new and fresh. And, a tradition going back to the 14th century, Janissary band was designed to inspire their comrades and terrorize the enemy with loud, noisy music. The instrumentation became very popular and was introduced into military bands all over Europe, with the King of Prussia and the Emperor of Austria forming Janissary bands as soon as instruments were made readily available. So Janissary instruments were found in most military bands by the end of the century. We see common things: bass drums, or sometimes called long drums, triangles with the rings, the jingles on them, cymbals, tambourines, and my personal favorite, the Turkish crescent, the Jinglin' Johnny, as we call it sometimes now. If y'all were at PASIC, you might have seen one booth had a handmade Turkish crescent on display, and it was quite a sight to behold.
Was it for sale?
I'm not sure.
I know Keith Aleo had a picture with it if you want to check out Keith's Facebook.
Yeah, I know he had it, but I saw a few of my friends taking pictures with it, and we actually need one here for something that there is planned for the spring, I guess, and that they've been asking me about getting one, and I was just curious.
I think UNLV built one. Might ask them. As far as percussion goes, Beethoven's got some obvious good Janissary music in his. Let's see, The Ruins of Athens in 1812. There's a nice Turkish march scored for bass, cymbals, triangle. And funny enough, in the chorus of it, he says to add as many noisy instruments as possible. So he really wants the rambunctious sound. And he also specifically requests 2 tambourines, which I think is pretty cool. In his Wellington's March from his Battle Symphony, he's got bass drum, and he really specifies the type to be used. That one also has a great bit of side drum, 2 drums for the English side, 2 drums for the French side. Bass drum represents cannon fire. So some really nice programmatic use of percussion. His Egmont Overture, they got snare drums, rolls off stage for Egmont's Dream. And then, of course, the Ninth Symphony in 23 has all the Janissary Turkish type accompaniment in the last movement. And I didn't know this till earlier today. I think that might be the first time of a requested pure triangle timbre in the orchestral literature. So meaning not a triangle with the traditional, the ring on it, but just a pure triangle sound.
I think you're right, because we talked about that like a long time ago, and I think I like Googled it and found that. So I think you're right on that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. As far as timpani goes, obviously Beethoven did a ton. Most likely the first to have timpani tunings besides 1 and 5. Fidelio, he's got them tuned to tritone. Symphony 7 for the scherzo, a minor 6. Symphonies 8 and 9 tuned to octaves throughout, in the inner movements. And then, of course, 9, we know you have the chordal writing. And then again, that Janissary bit at the end. You know, Beethoven, lesser known composer overall, but yeah, he definitely contributed quite a bit to percussion land. He really got, especially timpani, he got us playing. Yeah.
I just was like looking through some December 16th stuff also, and in 1921, Saint Saul passed away. So that's one more to add to the list of things that happened then.
Way to be a downer.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right. The Bacchanal from Samson and Delilah is, I swear, it's the first metal breakdown of like history. Yeah, the end of it.
Great. Caleb's off to a great start here.
Yeah, I know what I'm doing.
There it is.
So our guest today, he is the professor of music at Kutztown University, where he's the director of percussion and the chair of the Department of Music. In March 2016 and May 2017, the Kutztown University Percussion Ensemble and its Center for Mallet Percussion Research were featured on the cover of Percussive Notes. And in 2018, it was a subject of a segment on CBS Sunday Morning. He's a performing artist and clinician with Pisces Cymbals, Yamaha, Remo Percussion, Vic Firth, Grover, Toka, Boomwhackers. Didn't know you could be endorsed by Boomwhackers. That's pretty awesome. And Alfred Publishing. His book, co-authored with Chalo Eduardo, titled Drum Circle, A Guide to World Percussion, is published through Alfred. And he also presents solo recitals and workshops, as well as concert with the Kutztown University Percussion Ensemble worldwide. So please welcome to the show, Dr. Frank Kumor. How's it going, man?
So glad to be here. It's a great pleasure. This is my first official podcast, so I'm really excited.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I ran into Frank at PASIC and at what was formerly known as the RAM. It's called something else now. They changed the name to like the goat
Goodwood.
or the Goodwood.
Goodwood.
Yeah, not the
Rest
goat. They didn't go from the
rest in
RAM to the
peace.
goat. Yeah, but I ran in and we chatted real quick about the Kutztown Center for Mallet Mallet Percussion Research, and there's just so much cool stuff going on in there. And so I was wondering, yeah, Frank, to kind of kick us off, could you just tell us a bit about just yourself and how you came to be at Kutztown?
Yeah, sure. There was a sabbatical replacement position available. So as I was finishing up at Kentucky, I applied for that gig and I got it. Yeah, UK. And I got it. And then the next thing I knew, it was only a 1-year gig, so I was out for a bit. But then I started the World Percussion Ensemble because at the time that would have been 1997, 98. And recreational drumming was just sort of taking off. And I had just talked about writing this book with Chalo Eduardo. And that we kind of started this, I started this World Percussion thing there. And then the former professor there was not capable. Well, I shouldn't say not capable. He just didn't have any hand drumming or world percussion chops. So they invited me back, and it just kind of led one thing into the next. I have my master's degrees in music theory, so we had a sort of a bubble of students, and so I was teaching theory classes and percussion, and one thing led to the next, and I've never left since '97. So this is the start of my this is my 25th fall semester, which is really hard to believe. So.
Wow. Yeah, that's impressive. 25 years.
Yeah, and then after, once things sort of settled in, I was more into the more contemporary percussion ensemble and that kind of thing. We just kind of had that sort of taken off, and then but we also had this little piece of history in Kutztown, which we'll talk about a little bit more, I'm sure, in a little while. But the heritage and the history locally just also had this piece to it that was unique to Kutztown, and it just kind of developed into our Center for Mallet Percussion.
Well, speaking of the Center for Mallet Percussion, we chatted before the podcast when we weren't recording, but I was just mentioning that I am like so pumped for this episode because I studied percussion history at the University of Illinois with Bill Marsh, who is an absolute just expert at all this stuff. And I was fascinated to learn about like the history of especially Deagon instruments, but also Musser and those sort of old vintage brands. And one of the most fascinating things I found is the way that these instruments are just found in a garage or in some random place. And one of my favorite stories, actually, there's an article about this. The article is titled "Show Features Rare Xylophone." And there was a Deagon Artist Special xylophone, which is like the sort of Rolls Royce of xylophones, found at Hoover Middle School. Some random middle school just had this instrument, and there was a professor that stopped by to do a clinic, and I think sort of noticed it and figured out how to make an offer to the middle school to get it. But so these instruments, they're all around, but they're found in various conditions, and some are in symphony orchestras, and some are found in, a grandfather's attic as they're cleaning up or something like that. So there's all sorts of just weird stuff that follows these historic instruments. So can you speak to how the Center for Mallet Percussion Research started, and what's been your approach to finding these instruments?
Yes, absolutely. So there's kind of a convergence of several things. So I'm going to try to do this as logically as possible. But the Center for Mallet Percussion and its idea began when our primary percussion teacher before me, Will Rapp, it was his name. You guys might remember his name from marching band and drumline and all that kind of stuff from the Jensen years, and Hal Leonard. He was the percussion teacher at Kutztown. He was my teacher at KU. But he had, in 1979, he had a reunion of the International Marimba Symphony Orchestra, the group that Musser took to Europe. And so 35 of the original players for that ensemble lived in Berks County, which is where I live, and Kutztown lives, Lancaster County, which is just south of us, and Lehigh County, which is just north of us. Musser had this whole area sort of under his thumb, and which is super weird because like here we are that in this region, and it's almost like a folk instrument. So this started back in 1935 for that instrument, or for that concert and that event. But all those people, when they came back from the International Marimba Symphony Orchestra, they started marimba orchestras locally. And so there's all these people that have all these pockets of small marimba orchestras because I think they loved it so much. So the instrument, that's what started the idea. And a friend of ours, Dana Kimball, had the Musser King George, and he had the Musser's vibraphone that's at the Rhythm Discovery Center now. They have it on loan for a year from us. That came from his house. So we acquired all of that here back in 2015 as a celebration of Will's retirement, and we started a scholarship essentially for Will as he retired. But it blew up, and this is the funny thing. And if anybody could take anything away from this, we had a retiring university president, we had an interim university president, and then we had a first-year university president. So we went rogue, and we just bought all of the. I shouldn't say we bought it. We just acquired all this stuff because people they saw this first event that we did, and the local people just started bringing us things like my grandma played this, and this is no joke. I'm an amateur woodworker. I was working on a little project out in my yard. I have a studio with a garage that I bring my saws out, whatever. A lady drove in my driveway and said, "You're the percussionist," and she dropped a xylophone on my front step, and she said, "This was my grandmother's. It was in my attic," and it was a Deagon 866, a radio special xylophone. That it's a small one that's on the pit legs. And she literally drove in my driveway and then drove out, and it was like boom. And so we've been lucky in this region I think there was a music store. I'm starting to get some of the history here, but like there was a music store, I think, that sort of marketed some of these things to people. So there's a lot of the same kind of instruments locally. So, but that being said, we started this event to honor our former percussion professor with a scholarship, and within 3 years, it kind of blew up into this thing because nobody could stop us because no president wanted to make a decision to say no. And we were able to get a lot of energy behind it. So, but
Yeah, I was actually, I played at PASIC this past year, and I think it was like Ballroom C or I don't know, it's one of those things where we had our little warm up. Actually, as I was warming up, all the marimba orchestra instruments were rolling by me, and so I was like, oh, there's like a Deegan Imperial or whatever. And there's, like I said, I get so excited about this history stuff, but I just wanted to share one of my favorite sort of spicy stories from the Mallet percussion history, and maybe if someone's not familiar, it'll get them started on researching this stuff. But Musser worked for Deegan way back in the beginning of the 20th century, and there was a certain point where Musser left and founded his own company, and there are varying theories as to why. And I think the sort of accepted theory is that after the war, Deegan didn't hire back people that had gone out to, fight the war, and Musser didn't like that, so he started his own company, which I think tracks with something that could have happened. But in the Gary Burton autobiography, he says that Claire Musser founded his company after leaving his job as plant manager of Deegan. I was told that he left Deegan following the discovery that he was having an affair with Mrs. Deegan. So that is a much more interesting story that, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's good soap opera garbage talk for percussionists to think about.
Well, we have in our collection, we do have a picture. I didn't know this, but Musser had a son. And he didn't survive. But
did it look like Mrs. Deegan?
I don't know. I don't know what Mrs. Deegan looked like, but there's a picture of his son standing on a box playing a marimba, like because he was a little tiny, he was a little kid, so he couldn't reach a marimba keyboard. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what she looked like. we don't have that in our records yet.
Not yet. But yeah, there would be some DNA testing in records before too long, I guess. But and then also, like, if anyone's not familiar, the Deegan patents went through several hands over the years, but they actually now Yamaha owns the Deegan patents, which I think is unexpected. A Japanese company would get that. But when you look at the old Deegan Imperial and you look at the modern Yamaha YM6100 marimba, like you can see the evolution there. It's definitely very much modeled after that.
Well, Yamaha they've actually been to my house here. Well, representatives of Yamaha have been here to sort of look at some of the stuff that we've got going on because they were asking. My Deegan 145 vibraphone has a little lever to lock the pedal down. And so when I'm doing like multi-percussion pieces that require the open bar, like there's a few opportunity or instances where I needed to lock the pedal down. I was like, Yamaha, like do that. Because it seems like a simple thing. They do that on the orchestra bells, but I would love for them to have this on the vibraphone, to be honest. But anyway, they've sort of sampled the sounds of my Parsifal bells. They've sampled some of my regular standards and the specials. Yeah. So I did know they have that, but they move slow in some cases.
Well, and it's weird the way that I guess the business used to go, because I've got this right here, this Glock that's mine, and it is I don't know if you can see it, but it is a Roy E. Duncan.
Yeah,
Roy E. Duncan, and I put it on Orchestral Percussion, the Facebook group, a while ago to try and find out like some history of it, because a friend of mine just gave it to me that it was like his grandfather's that he bought or something like that, and turns out that it's a Deegan. It's a Deegan standard that apparently he would make instruments for people, and then they would go and put their own badge.
Right. That was very common.
Apparently, yeah. But for me, my head exploded when I heard that, because just the idea of, oh, hey, I'm going to take this Adams, marimba, and I'm going to stamp Nosny on it and be like, yeah, this is the Nosny. Like that just, it must have been a time where they were playing fast and loose with all.
Definitely would not purchase that one.
Well, it was a branding thing. So Leedy did the same thing. So I had a Wurlitzer. It was branded Wurlitzer. So like other music companies would essentially connect with Deegan or Leedy to say, we want to sell some orchestra bells. And so I had a Wurlitzer set of orchestra bells that is clearly a Deegan, I'm sorry, a Leedy instrument, because it looks just like my Leedy instrument, identical. Nothing changed other than the stamp on the front of the case.
It's just crazy to me. I get, yeah, it must have just been, before they really kind of, clamped down on, intellectual property and copyright and all patents and all that, I guess.
Well, I think it was just, so the Wurlitzer was the organ company. So Wurlitzer made instruments and they had organ, bells and xylophones within the organ. So they would buy probably bars or whatever and just probably make an agreement with Leedy or Deegan and say.
Well, and also, like, if, today, if Steinway wanted to put a marimba in their catalog, not that they do, but I'm sure Adams would be happy to make a marimba and slap Steinway on it.
Maybe, sure, yeah. Could be.
When you're dealing with all this vintage stuff, stuff from 100+ years ago in some cases, how much of that do you have to go through, such as restorations, like when somebody brings you a board, or if I know you have the Gordon Peters library, how much cataloging and preservation and restoration of those materials do you have to go through?
Well, right now, that's a great question. Right now, we are literally just in boxes in the main percussion studio. I mean, it's literally in plastic, like Rubbermaid boxes, because we don't have a filing system. I've just been approved to buy a museum quality software system that's going to be able to catalog all that. So that's going to take some time. As far as the instrument, so the hard part about, I have an intern that's from our library science. We have a master's in library science at Kutztown, so which is really convenient for us, because those master students come over and sort of root through everything, and they kind of tell us where that we need to put it, because we don't have that skill set really. And but in terms of the actual instruments, I do very little restoration on them. If they're really in a bad shape, I generally don't. I mean, I don't want to sound funky about this, but I don't. If it's something that we have to put a lot of work into, if it's not super unique, I don't necessarily accept it. And then we have a lot of people that, they saw after the CBS Sunday Morning segment. I had phone calls for people wanting me to buy their instruments, and we just don't have the budget to buy their stuff. I mean, I had a lady from San Diego and sent me this huge list of equipment, which would have been great for anybody, but it was over $100,000 of stuff, and we just couldn't do that. So the instruments that come to us, unless there's something super special, they're generally in playable condition. And to be honest with you, this might sound silly, but we're at the end of our semester. Some of my students are going to take some of these instruments home with them to practice on over the break, because the people that have given them to us want them to be played. That's simply the truth of it. And so I have my Deegan Imperial Marimba, which is a weird oddball instrument. And Ben, I don't know if you saw it at PASIC, or Kayla, if you saw it at PASIC, it was the silver one. It literally, the bars are painted silver. And I thought, when I
did see it, yeah.
so the lady came and gave that to us, and I thought, oh no, like she painted the bars. I can't believe this. And then I unrolled them, and they weren't painted. They were natural. That was the factory finish. And so the number on the inside of the instrument says Deegan 64, which is what that model number is, but it said SPL. So it must have been special order. Then she gave me a picture of her mom the first day she got this instrument. She's this little kid with a gleamingly silver Imperial Marimba, which is so wild, because all of them were this other thing. So I'm sure that's the only one that exists on that level. And it's just, but the lady gave that to us because she said, you guys are going to use it. And so one of my students will take that home over Christmas break, and it's a 4-octave instrument, but they can work on some Mitchell Peters and permutations and whatnot, So
I think that's so great that you do send them home and they do get played, because like what good is an instrument in a museum if we can't hear it? Right. And as long as, I'm sure you're teaching your students to be responsible and not crack bars, and it's like, yeah, it should be played. Good.
Yeah, absolutely. And the truth is, the worst conditioned instrument that we have is the Musser King George. It's all broken. I mean, all the bars on that thing, well, not all of them. There's like 5 bars that are totally broken on it, but I probably won't get it repaired because I don't want to, once you get into that piece, then you're going to have to refinish the bars, and the finish that's on those bars that's different. But the cool thing about that instrument, that's the instrument that Gordon Scout recorded 2 Mexican Dances on his original LP. So it's cool to have that. And we just got Gordon's actual other King George. His actual instrument is at our school now too. So anyway, but so as far as the maintenance, the only things that I've ever really done, I retuned our Deegan 266, the 4.5 octave artist special, because the artist special xylophone sounds a little funky because of the tuning, because it's not quint tuned. So it has this kind of a strange sound when you're putting it with A442 instruments. So I did retune the 266, which is the 4.5 octave one. And there's another reason I did that. And I don't remember who mentioned this. I think maybe it was you, Ben. But this instrument came from a high school. A high school band director called me and said, we need a tuba. We've got this 4.5 octave xylophone that we're never going to use. Do you want it? And so we made a deal for $2,000. I got that instrument, and he got a tuba.
Yeah, that was like at Illinois. I remember Bill Murch. I think he said below the stage he found 2 Deegan artist special. Just like, what? Who? Why? Who put these here? Why aren't they?
our 888, our Deegan 888 was in a shower in an old dressing room in the Grainger auditorium. I was a student when we found it. We were literally like, "What's this room?" And we opened his door, and it's like, "Oh, it was an old shower, like off stage." And of course,
you need to, as part of your archives, have a list of all the weird places instruments have been found, so that people can look in those places.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. And the thing wasn't set upable. It was broken. It was just but it had boxes and cases and everything. And so as a sophomore, I was a finalist in a soloist competition, and our buddy of mine repaired the end pieces for it so that we can set it up. And I took that to Michigan as a sophomore in college to compete in a soloist competition. I didn't win. I came in second. Stupid saxophone. But I'm not bitter.
Yeah, for sure. Man, that's crazy. It makes me want to go to work right now and just start digging around in the basement and hope some sort of board turns up. You mentioned this at PASIC, and I thought it was pretty interesting. You said y'all had found a piece written by Percy Grainger for the Musser Tuneful Percussion, like a percussion ensemble work that hasn't been played or released yet.
Correct. So, David Harvey. So, if you guys are following any of the historic marimba stuff that's on Facebook, David Harvey and I.
Sorry to interrupt, but was it for Musser or Deegan instruments? Because I know a lot of the Musser score or the Grainger scores will actually say for Deegan tuned instruments.
Yeah, sorry.
It was for Musser. It was for Musser.
Oh, okay. And must have been after the affair.
Yeah. So to be honest with you, I had it out. It's on my desk at my office, and I was going to bring it home, and I totally spaced, and I was gonna show it to you guys because I know Caleb, you had asked about that. But yeah, David Harvey brought that over, and it's a manuscript. It's a Percy Grainger manuscript. And it says for Musser on it, which is pretty cool. And no, I don't think so. The Musser family has been here. So they've actually come up, and the remainder of the lineage of him, they've been up, and they've actually shared some stuff with us and photos. And it's really interesting. A lady who was a caretaker for Musser, she kept a whole bunch of stuff because she didn't want it to get thrown away. I guess the family was going to clean out the homestead, and they were throwing stuff out. And so we have all of these pictures. I have a record of Musser that he made for his mom for Mother's Day. It literally is an old 78 record that he was somehow recorded back in the day, and it's him playing hymns for Mother's Day for his mom, which is pretty wild. And so we put it we have a 78 machine at KU, so we put it up there and played it. It's wild. I mean, he's singing and playing marimba. Yeah. It's pretty crazy. So it's just, but he's like, and he speaks to his mom on the recording. Yeah. So we've gotten this from, so this lady said, I couldn't let this go. And she just brought it up, dropped it off at KU, and was like, peace. So it's just, but because Musser was local, I mean, he was from the Lancaster area here. So I think there's a lot of folks that are just locally want to support some of that stuff. They still have that memory. So when we started the Center for Mallet Percussion, they were just, you should have this, which is, it's great for us.
So is this a piece that's going to be put out? I mean, I'm sure there's lots of people that are really interested in what this piece sounds like. Is this something that's going to be published?
Right. So I don't know that. I'm not sure how we're going to handle that yet. So people ask us sort of these questions all the time. All right, the Mitchell Peters stuff, the library we have, we've contracted that. We know what the focus of that is. Some of this oddball stuff, I'm not sure how we're going to do that. Our grand opening of the building is supposed to be next September. My guess is that the first weekend of November, we always do a specific event tied to the Center for Mallet Percussion Research. So I'm hoping to premiere it. The premiere that we know, I'm going to try to do it then. I'm sure we'll make it available on some level via library loan or whatever. We don't want this stuff to we want to share it with the world. So it's not about just keeping it at KU, but there's educational stuff behind it and historical stuff. So we will do that, but we just don't know how that's going to look yet. So our foundation and our university they're doing all that stuff, all the talk. So, but it's available to be used. That's the whole function.
Yeah, I think it's kind of cool. I mean, I bet all four of us probably know a musicologist or an ethnomusicologist that like wrote a PhD and they went to Rome and sat in some crypt and like flipped through some old books and learned a new language for a year to write their one paragraph of their PhD dissertation. But it's kind of cool that that all this stuff has kind of collided and collected where you are, and it's like, wow, yeah.
Well, on that side of it too, we've had researchers from Australia, Germany, France. There's a professor in France who he graduated from the Sorbonne, but he finished he was talking about, his topic was the marimba orchestra in Europe, and he finished his dissertation at KU with our stuff with Musser, because of Musser going over there.
That's cool.
I mean, it's totally cool, because we literally have file cabinets of stuff that I haven't even looked at. It's just, one of my students is very interested right now, so he's been going through doing some of those things to help us know what we have. There's dissertations after dissertations in our file cabinets.
I wanted to ask about if anyone listening, if you go to gordonpetersmusic.org, it's kind of insane. I mean, there's 180 plus pieces. I mean, and you can go all the way to, if you want to have the marimba orchestra version of Mahler 1, Movement 3, it's there to purchase, and you can get it and you can play it. But what was it like getting all of that digitized and online and everything?
Gordon has done all of that. So we are hands off on that 100%. So Gordon got involved with us when we did the Marimba Masters event, and he wanted to house so the interesting thing with Gordon is that he's based all of that music off the old Marimba Masters collection. And so, and just as a side note, I did my master's at Duquesne, and Stanley Leonard was the timpani teacher at Duquesne, and he was one of the original Marimba Master guys. I wish I'd known that then when I was there, because I missed a huge opportunity as a master's student working with Stan Leonard. And then you were also talking about Beethoven. I don't know if you're aware of the Lauren Mazel, Stan Leonard additions to the timpani parts of all the Beethoven symphonies, because Mazel changed, because he thought that his idea was that Beethoven would have written more parts had the drums been able to be tunable at that point. So when he did perform with the Pittsburgh Symphony, there were other added timpani parts. So that's a side note. But anyway,
also, like, one weird fact is that Stokowski had toyed with the idea of adding bass marimbas to the bass section of the orchestra for more clarity.
Correct.
I don't think it made past the experimentation stage, but
no,
weird orchestra footnote.
Yeah, that's right. But back to the Peters collection, Gordon. So when I go to, I'll be in Midwest next week. I'll reach out to Gordon. I doubt he'll come out. He usually comes out, and we usually have lunch when we get out there. But Gordon has diligently arranged all those. That's not all from the original Marimba Masters collection. He just still does that. I think that's what he does to keep active. And so he has several engravers that he works with that provide us the digital copies on all that. In fact, he's faster than the digital engravers, because people will call us and be like, hey, we want this piece. And I don't have it yet. I legit just don't have it yet, because it's not come back from the people who are putting it into the digital form. So that is sort of its own thing. And Gordon wanted that to be sort of a resource so that it could help fund our Center for Mallet Percussion. But yeah, he gave us all of that stuff just to sell, basically. But then, the other thing with Gordon Peters is that he's so funny, because he's like, if you put Gordon Peters and Robert Van Cise in a room, they will self-destruct, both of them, because Gordon Peters only does those transcriptions. He thinks that is, I mean, in his world, that's what he really wants to see percussion evolve as: the reading, the playing, and he wants a string bass with all of those arrangements. And I was at the National Percussion Festival in Indianapolis a few years ago, and like Van Cise just won't listen to a transcription. He's not going to comment on that, because he's thinking, more new, contemporary, original music. And I think there's a place for both of those things. When I have we played at the McCormick Marimba Festival a few years ago, and I had a really young group of students, and they had a hard time with some of that Gordon Peters stuff, because it's not easy music. And you think it's a transcription, you think it's, I'm just playing this melody or this harmony. It's hard. And Molly on the Shore, the Gordon Peters Molly on the Shore, is unbelievably difficult. I mean, he did the Grainger arrangement of that. And so it's just like, well, it's the Grainger piece, but he did his own arrangement. And it's hard. It's just hard.
I had a question. You were talking
Sorry.
about like traveling to Tampa for the McCormick Marimba Festival, and obviously PASIC in Indianapolis. And like you said, like a lot of these instruments are, I mean, they're old, they're fragile, and I think there's a certain legitimacy to just leaving them as they are, not like pulling all the hardware off and replacing it. How do you transport them when you take them to an event like that? I'm sure very carefully is the short answer, but
yeah. Well, the King George marimbas are tanks. So remember, once we get this thing up and running, there's a great picture that we have in our collection, and I've seen it elsewhere too. It's not just in ours; it's a common picture. But it's the cases of the King George marimbas stacked up in front of the Deegan building, and they reach the 4th floor windows. So they make like a pyramid out of these cases. The King George marimbas are just tanks. They're so heavy. They're almost, just. When we decide to move them, I really don't like doing that. They're just too heavy. They're all brass. They're just a ton. The other Deegan instruments, like the xylophones and whatnot, they are designed to be moved. So in the sense that they have, I have like random cases that they all fit in. They're not original cases, but I just, like, if I see a case that, so we have this weird thing in Pennsylvania that we can get with a military surplus. So every once in a while, like these random boxes that might have had, I don't know, some sort of exhibit displays or screen displays. I'll just go get those for like $10 or $15 at the surplus warehouse, and I could put a xylophone in that, and they have wheels on them. And so that's how we kind of did that. Whenever I see those things come up on our surplus, I just go and grab them. And so the smaller xylophones are designed to be moved. And I do actually have some original cases. As I mentioned earlier, the 888, I have the original cases for that. I have cases for some of our Leedy instruments that they just showed up with those. So, and those are pretty cool. So anyway, to your point, they're not as fragile as you might think. And, they're, as long as you take, wrap the bars, take care of them, there's really, I mean, we've all moved those instruments, I'm sure all of us on this call have banged a set of resonators against something at some point by accident. So
when I was a student at UNT, there was this grad student named John Roberts who was from South Carolina and had this great Southern drawl. And whenever anyone would clip a corner with a marimba or something, he would always go, "Don't tail Mark Ford."
yeah, I know. Will, so
I have so many stories about John Roberts, none of which are appropriate for this.
but it's really funny because the other part of this equation is that the instruments are just, now that they're in a place that are being used and whatnot, there's some deterioration that happens. And so my colleague, former professor Will Rapp, we got to PASIC and he was kind of giving me the stinky eye, because he's like, look at this Musser vibraphone, it's got some marks on it that it didn't have before. Now that's an instrument we don't move, we don't use it, it stays in a space, because it's a 3.5 octave vibraphone, which is very cumbersome to move. It's got these huge, so if you know the Canterbury marimbas, it's the same size as the Canterbury marimbas, and it's unwieldy. Like, so we never move it, and it doesn't go anywhere. But he was like, are they hitting it with stuff? And I'm like, no, I think it's just in a space that's being used, and like there's little flecks of paint that'll come off every now and then. So I feel like we have to be careful about some of that kind of stuff, but that's part of the aging process too. We have Samuel's, one of Dave Samuel's vibraphones. It's actually here at my house because we don't have room for it up at school right now. But a few people told me, like, when I got that from Dave's house, it was all wrapped up in duct tape because he hated rattles. I don't know if you guys ever worked with Dave. Brian, maybe you did, because he used to come to Kentucky all the time when I was there. But he hated rattles, so he would just wrap duct tape on stuff. But I'd like, we can't have an instrument that's just got duct tape residue and all this. So we cleaned that one up a little bit. And some people were like, "Oh, you should have left it."
What brand was that?
It's a Yamaha.
Right.
It's a Yamaha 29, I think it's 2,700 bars on a 3,400 frame. The numbers are, so he must have taken, because the old Yamaha Vibe was like a solid frame that you couldn't take apart. And so I think he was probably mad about that, and he wanted to move it. So he got the bars fit on the next model. So the frame is one model and the bars are another model. But I was like, there's no way I'm going to put that in our center with all the duct tape on it. Like, it's duct tape. I mean, and it looks horrible, and it's sticky and it's just gross. So I've taken care of that a little bit. But so we keep them clean. We keep them, we try to shine them up as best as possible with very little bit of refinishing.
Yeah. So we've kind of danced around this question a little bit, but you have 8 King Georges, the Century of Progress, King George Bass, Canterbury Marimba, Deegan Imperial Marimba, Deegan Artist Special Xylos, the Radio Special Xylos, the Songbells, the Leedy Vibes, the Canterbury. You have the sweet one that's the stacked vibraphone marimba combo.
That's the Brewer instrument. Yep.
Yeah. So just got to ask, so how many keyboards are over there?
That I should know the answer to that question right off. We have more King Georges. And here's another piece. So I don't want to leave this call without saying this. The concert master of the International Marimba Symphony Orchestra in 1935 was from Kutztown. Very strange, right? His name is Carl Fisher, and his family is still living in Kutztown. And so they have his original King George marimba is still at their house. So that's going to come up to KU. We have the one with the sousaphone bell. I don't know if you guys at PASIC saw that one, but that instrument Musser sold it to a professor at Kutztown, a bunch of years ago. That instrument never left more than 5 miles from KU, which is amazing. So, we have at this point about 20 King Georges in our midst, which is, look, I'm not trying to be a hoarder, but the problem with the instrument is that, it's not a concert instrument. It's an orchestra instrument. It doesn't have the right range and all that kind of stuff, but we've got a couple of them at the school now. One interesting piece is that, there was a family out of Allentown who they met they were kids on the trip. They met Paul Snyder and Arlene. The name just left me. They met on the tour and they got married. And so she had collected, so we have their shoes, we have her dress, we have the tuxedos from that original Marimba Symphony Orchestra, everything. She kept a diary, unbelievable detail. Arlene Reinhardt. Turns out Westchester University just got donated Arlene's instrument. So I got to make a deal with Chris Hanning and Ralph Sorrentino, because we have everything of that family except her marimba. So we'll trade Westchester one of ours, hopefully, for that, so that we can bring those two back together, because that's pretty cool. And I got a random call a couple of weeks ago. A lady came up from Florida. They're from locally. Their family was local, but they brought us another whole level of detail. And the first time I have a complete list of every member in that original orchestra. I don't know another list like that exists. So it's pretty cool. So like that part of the region is, and I think that's kind of why it's settled at KU. You know, we're the heart of it, which who knew?
So you mentioned we keep on talking about the King George marimba, and so for those that aren't familiar with the King George and Century of Progress and these marimba orchestras, could you just tell our listeners a little bit about what those groups were and those instruments that were created by Musser under Deegan for them? And then also, I just had a couple of things. One, we talked about these marimba orchestras like years ago on the podcast, and we found a quote from one of the I think it was one of the female members that was saying, you know, yes, it was boys and girls, but there was no funny business going on the trip. So it's interesting. A couple did meet and get married from this, because it certainly wasn't any funny business under Mr. Musser's eye. And then also, I know there exists King George vibraphones, or at least a King George vibraphone. So with these marimba orchestras, they made the King George marimbas. So where did that vibraphone come from? And there's a video of, I think it's Joe Locke on YouTube trying it out. And I think from what I understand, the fans, instead of all the fans being in one line, the fans were sort of spiraled as you went down, so that not every key was open or closed at the same time. So you got this wild wah effect when you had it.
Right.
The motor running.
So I can speak to several of those things, and if I forget one, please remind me, because there's a lot of details in that question. So first of all, the marimba orchestras. So the 1933 orchestras, the Century of Progress World's Fair. So that instrument and that orchestra was for that event. The interesting thing about that was more Midwestern based. So there's not a lot of those instruments locally here in Pennsylvania. We have a few, but not as many as the King George. The King George, so the International Marimba Symphony Orchestra, which was for the 25th Jubilee celebration of King George in England, Musser recruited 35 players from this region, which is why all these instruments are here, I think. And so those two orchestras were 100-piece orchestras of 50 men and 50 women, and they ended up doing these great concerts. And the vibraphone that you're speaking of was, I think, made after the orchestra, the King George, because we also have the King George bass marimba, which was not made for the orchestra. That was made in 1940s, and that was a separate instrument. So the Lionel Hampton, I think the King George vibraphone was made for Lionel Hampton, I believe, and so that was a special. If there's a movie that we watched in, Brian will appreciate this, Dick Domek's History of Jazz class. There's a jazz movie that he watched, and it's Benny Goodman, Lionel Hampton, Louis Armstrong, all these heavy players are in there. But that marimba or that vibraphone is in that movie. You can see it in there. Speaking of the fans, I have a 4-octave DeMaro vibraphone that has the same spiral paddles. And it's great. I will tell you this. I love, some of my other instruments that we have two 5 1/3 octave DeMaro marimbas, and we also have 2 DeMaro bass marimbas, which go down to the low A, below the normal low C. That I love those instruments. The problem with the spiraled resonators is that
can't play with the motor off. Yeah,
that's right. That's exactly right, because there's always something closed. And Damaro's motor goes so slow you can barely hear it, but you have to have the motor on. I'm actually still contemplating on calling him back and asking him to make me one that's like normal. Because it can
seems
be
like
a
you
little
could just
bit.
have two sets of resonators or like interchangeable, shutters or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but it's so I wasn't aware of that, to be honest. This is that, I'm learning something new also, that I wasn't aware that King George instrument was like that, with the fat. But we do know that we have a photograph of an instrument. It was taken in Chicago, but we also have like a studio photograph of the one that must have had two sousaphone bells on. And the sousaphone bells, we think, had electronics in it, because the one that we have from the back shot with the two sousaphone, there looks like there's speakers mounted in the tops of the sousaphone bells. So we think there was some sort of rudimentary amplification, but also there were 7 pedals to operate the metal bars on top. And when Musser was here and worked with Will, he was describing a situation where he wanted to change the vibrato on the higher notes to a faster speed, and he was using pedals for that. So we have this back picture of this marimba with the vibraphone bars on top with 7 pedals coming out the back of it, which is pretty wild. Yeah, but we don't know where that instrument. I think my best speculation is that the International Marimba Symphony Orchestra tour almost broke the Deegan company. So I have a feeling Deegan made Musser sell that in Europe. I have a feeling that instrument's not in the United States, if it still exists. But the other one, the original one, is here.
And then also, like, one of my favorite facts about the King George Marimba Orchestra is they were sent to London to play for this Jubilee, and there was some sort of weird legal international thing, and they actually never made it off the boat. They just played from the shore on the boat.
It was a strike. It was a strike. It was a union strike.
Yeah.
So the shoremen wouldn't unload the instruments, because they were on strike. So they got to London, and they never played for the King. So King George.
I heard that they played from the boat. I can just see like Claire Omar Musser being like, "Well, guys,
we're here.
We can't do it, so we're gonna do what we can do and call it a night."
Yeah. So they had number 101. So there were 100 instruments, right? So there were 50 men, 50 women. There were 150 instruments each. And then there was 101 was made for Musser himself, which is one that we have in our collection. And then 102 was made for the King, and we don't know where that is. That's probably still in Europe somewhere, if it exists still. Yeah. And
then I heard that because of this union dispute, when there was some group from London that came to the U.S. and they like repaid the favor somehow. I have to look around for that, but there was some sort of revenge, or maybe it happened in the States first, then when they got over there. But yeah, some good bitter rivalry there.
Nice. Yeah, and I don't know that backstory on that one, but yeah, it's they ended up in Brussels and they played in Paris, so they did get some other gigs over there. And again, in our diaries from the ladies who've given us some of this information, that there's all the details of the food and the activities. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. But Caleb, you had asked also the number of keyboards. We have, I don't know. I mean, I can't give you a strict, like, I wish I could say we have 35 marimbas, but we have enough marimbas for every student at KU to take home. In fact, some of my students did bring instruments when we went on shutdown for the COVID. I just send them home with instruments, and they still have them because I don't have a place to store them right now. So it's a nice problem to have, so to speak. But yeah, so I'm guessing in the ballpark of 30 marimbas, probably 15, 20 xylophones. Vibes were a little less on vibraphones, weirdly enough. But we have a couple sets of song bells. We have harpophone, which is the Leedy's version of song bells. The cool thing about the harpophone is that it's in a case. So it has the resonator tubes, but they're bent and they're within a portable case, but they're heavy as hell. I mean, the steel bars are just so heavy.
I have two sort of questions to follow up that. One is that if there was a performing professional that, say, bought, I don't know, a vibraphone, I think is a good example, and the frame was like functional, but maybe not in quite perfect condition, like the pedal squeaked, there was a rattle. In your opinion, for the professional performer, not the collector, should they sort of try and restore the frame, or like have a new frame fabricated? In other words, like, is there validity to keeping something for the performer that is not necessarily in perfect working order? And then I also wanted to know, have you come across any, especially Deegan, things even more out off the beaten path than the silver marimba? Like the Deegan catalogs have like the pipolophone and like weird instruments that no one I think has ever seen.
Right. Yeah. So
Or those,
here,
what are those chimes called? You know, the Anklung metal sort of thing.
yeah. So they had the Dan Sullivan at Westchester got, or I mean at Steve Weiss got some lady on. She had it on her porch for 50 years. One of those aluminum Anklungs or metal Anklungs, and Dan has it down at Steve Weiss. It's just wild. It's just amazing that he has that.
Mark Ford also has a set of those.
Does he? Does he?
Yeah.
No kidding. And so those are pretty cool. We have the tubophones. So I Craigslist. I always go. I eat my breakfast and I pull up Craigslist every day and I hit Deegan and see what comes up. And there was a tubophone that came up near Philadelphia, and I went and got that. Somebody made a new case for it.
Which, if anyone's not familiar, this is like basically like the pipes you would use for threads. Like they actually had a keyboard instrument of those.
Right, exactly right. So, but I have now 3 sets of those. I have a 3.5 octave set, and I have 2.5 octave sets. One was branded. We talked about that earlier. It's clearly a Deegan instrument that's stamped with the Deegan stamps, but it's made for Carl Fischer music.
Could you send us a picture of those to edit in?
I can. I gotta dig them out because
yeah,
they're buried under some stuff in my. The harpophone was a cool instrument. We have the bowed marimbaphone. So we had that at PASIC a couple years ago. So that's the metal bars. I actually used that as our opening concert. We do these what we call Music Mondays at KU. It's a streaming concert series every other Monday. And so the first one that we did this year was for faculty only. And I played, if you know, the Arvo Part Spiegel and Spiegel, which is for violin and piano. I did the violin part on the bowed marimbaphone, which was super cool. And to be honest, I think Arvo Part would have wanted it that way. So that's another cool instrument. We don't have the wood version of that, the wood marimbaphone. That's not something that we own in our collection yet. But there's just a bunch of those strange instruments that are all out there, and who knows when they're gonna arrive at our door. But we have enough of those wild ones, and also in the room where I'm sitting, I can't get them out, but the staff bells that Deegan had were basically handbells that were mounted on racks. We don't have the Deegan version of those, but we have. I don't know if you guys know the name Artie Lieberman, but he had a backline company in North Carolina, and he was a collector, and he's the guy who wanted DeMauro to make these bass marimbas to sort of match the King George bass marimbas. So he did, and he unfortunately passed a few years ago, but his son contacted me, Josh Lieberman, and he gave us all of Artie's instruments for the center. But within that was these handbells that are mounted on racks, which are basically staff bells. That just Malmark is they're a handbell company here in Pennsylvania, but they're one of the major handbell companies. And Artie convinced them to make a 5 octave set of handbells that you can play with mallets. So I have them sitting back here. I just have no room to put them up anywhere, but they come with stands. And so the staff bells that Deegan made, we don't have, but we have a modern version of those as well.
And what about the first part of that question, like the squeaky vibraphone pedal question?
Sorry. So, all right. So I at PASIC this year, the Heartland Marimba Quartet was part of our marimba orchestra. They had, and the name is escaping me, a gentleman, and you might want to contact them. They had made a new frame for an old set of Deegan Aurora Vibes. So the bars, but the guy made acrylic tubes, so they're clear plastic tubes for resonators. And he had put it on a Deegan frame that matched the bars, but it wasn't the Aurora Aurora frame, because I don't know if you know that Aurora frame is a nightmare. It's just like heavy. It's just heavy, and it looks like Formica. It's not one of my most favorite Deegan frames ever on the planet. But Matt Cawley had this person make a frame for him, and it's separate. So I think that's perfectly fine. I don't, if you're using the instrument and it is like this vibe that I have over here, this Deegan 145, it has a mercury switch in it. So I mean, there's literally a tube of mercury. So there's two wires inside this vial of glass, and when you shift it up, the mercury connects. It falls into the place where the two wires connect, and the motor still runs. It just, I can't take that for a gig with mercury in it. I mean, that would be. I'm thinking that's probably not very green.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. We, at the school I teach at, we have a Yamaha marimba from the 1970s, and I looked at serial number 2.
No
of this,
kidding. Awesome.
Model 4 1/3, which I don't know how we ended up with that here. But it's a not height adjustable frame, and it's old, so the frame is kind of warped and the bars don't sit quite right. So I got in touch with Matt Coe to make a new frame for it. And so I have to ship some pieces of the frame to Matt to fabricate. But the problem is the end pieces, the top of the end piece is not detachable from the bottom. So probably tomorrow or Thursday, I'm going to have to take a hacksaw to it and cut off the bottom of the frame. So yeah, I'm glad to know that I'm not committing a mortal sin in your eyes for creating a more functional instrument. It's also not height adjustable, so.
It is what it is, I mean, we have all these instruments, and the instruments are going to be used, right? I mean, so I'm sure there's a zillion sets of, how many bars. So here's a good example. A band director locally was retiring, a friend of mine, and he was cleaning out his closets, and he found a set of xylophone bars. Deegan 868 or 868, 858. I can't remember the number, but it was just this random set of. Sorry, my dog wants to get in the picture here. No. So it was just this random set of bars that he found in the closet, and there was no frame, no resonators. But the actual number of the xylophone came up on eBay, and it was the frame. But I had to send everything to Matt Coe to sort of redo because it was all beat up.
And I've seen some of Matt's projects that he does a great job with, like the old Deegan instruments. And there was one I saw he did a Deegan xylophone, and of course, like old frames are not height adjustable, and it looked like he made a height adjustable frame that looked like it looked identical to the original Deegan frame, which was cool because it kept the style, but it's modernized and
No, I don't have a problem. Personally, I don't have a problem. I mean, they're instruments to be played, I mean, do you have an old saxophone or an old trumpet that you don't repair? I mean, what I mean? Like, if there's other instruments that need to be done, I mean, I don't have a problem with that at all. So, but I wouldn't necessarily take one of my instruments that are. So here's a good example. There's a King George that Indiana University had for a while that came up on. I don't know if you know this site. It's called GovDeals, GovDeals, and sometimes universities will put stuff on there. Indiana University put their King George on there a few years ago, but whoever was teaching there at some point actually added bars to the top of it. So it was not a normal looking King George. They didn't really extend the frame. They just kind of added bars to the top of the frame, and it just looked really. I don't know that I would do that. I mean, I'm sure they were using it in a practice room to cover certain rep. I probably wouldn't have done that to that type of instrument, but if I just had a set of King George bars without anything else, sure, make a frame for it. If you can do that, that'd be fine.
So when y'all made the new building that's opening in September, it's only percussion, right? Like it's a percussion focused building. And then
all percussion.
Yeah. Is that also where like your students can practice and you'll have ensembles and whatnot? So it's like split, half school, half keyboard center?
Yes and no. It'll all be accessible all the time. That's the idea of it. So the families who get, the Green family, they want the students to be around that stuff. So the muster room that we're going to have, muster's instruments will be in that room. But if the students want to practice on that instrument, they're going to be able to go in that room and practice on that instrument. We're going to have a rehearsal room in the basement. There's 3 stories on the room, 3 stories in the building. We're going to have some large storage space for instruments that we're not effectively using at any given moment. but there will be instruments in every display room, and those instruments will be available for rehearsal or practice or whatever. So that's, again, the families who have given us those instruments, they want them to be used and appreciated. So we'll have the room set up, but there will be access by the students to those rooms. If there, some of this, the BuildCon collection of recordings, yeah, obviously there's probably not going to be a marimba in that room. There might be a xylophone in that room if somebody wants to listen and play along with some of those old recordings, whatever. But the students might not dig into some of that a little bit, but there's going to be enough space that they'll be able to spread around the entire 3 floors of the building and get their work done.
That's awesome. that's a good space.
I mean, there's a performance space in the building, so it's like a 100-seat recital hall. Basically, it's going to be a flat floor, so we can do just basic, any random setup. So, but it's being treated acoustically so that we can have it as a small recital hall. So yeah, I think the whole percussion everything. Richard Wells, the primary donor, he basically said, I want all the percussion in this building. You should be split across different spaces. So we said, okay.
Well, Frank, I think you've sort of hinted at this, but to ask a direct question, you've talked about where the center came from and sort of where it stands now. What's your vision for the Center for Mallet Percussion Research going into the future?
Oh, yeah. So I want it to be a place for people to come and research and experience the instrument. So we've had a mix of academics, we've had a mix of just interested people. Like again, we've had families that my mom played in the International Marimba Symphony Orchestra. You guys have all this stuff. We want to see what that was all about, that kind of thing. So my vision and our vision at KU is that it really is regionally, it's important. So we're a regional state institution. So this really brings something that's unique to our region to the forefront. So we're meeting the mission of the university. But also, I want people. So here's a good example. University of West Virginia came up. George Willis came up last May. They streamed a concert from our space. So all the students learned George Hamilton Green rags and stuff like that. So they came and played on some of the instruments that we have and they streamed that concert back. Well, it was for everybody, but primarily for their West Virginia audience. So I'm hoping we can, provide that kind of opportunity where your university is studying muster stuff. All right, so come learn a couple of the etudes. We have the manuscript of the Paul Creston Concerto for marimba. We have a manuscript of that, Muster's notes in it, and we have Vida Chenoweth's notes and something like that. So if somebody wanted to come and play that piece at our facility, reviewing some of those notes and whatnot, that's my vision. I want people I want them to sort of get into that information and just see where, if they can hopefully play a concert there and or stream it or whatever, research our doors are open. The one, PAS, and we and PAS have had a great relationship so far. So it's been really fun to loan our instruments to them and have, we took Dave's instrument out last year for PAS, or 2 years ago. And right now our muster instruments for the 100th anniversary of the vibraphone is there. So we're hoping that we can provide that academic space. PAS, it's harder for people to get into some of that material just based on their setting, but we have the infrastructure to let access to all of this stuff for our world of percussion and any interested researcher. So that's my vision, is to just be accessible. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say on those scores, manuscripts you mentioned with notes from Musser and various other people, have there been any particularly enlightening or interesting or funny notes that you've come across?
I haven't researched all those right now, but it's interesting because, Vida and Musser, from what I understand, had a little bit of a conflict at some point, so it's going to be, we have both manuscripts with both of their notes in it. I would love to be able to compare the two, that kind of idea. But then also, I think that with the, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry, my dog rang my wind chimes over there. He got up on the thing. I heard the bells ringing. So I don't know if you guys heard that, but he's climbing on stuff. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But overall, I just, I want there to be access. And whether we decide to go online some of the stuff we're going to put accessible via, a website or whatever. I don't know how that's going to look yet. We want people to come to the building. Obviously, we have a building to experience the instruments, but I think some of the basic information will probably end up getting online and have that accessible as well.
I mean, I have a friend who he's a historian person with libraries, and hearing him talk about just the process of taking like an old text and preserving it and digitizing it and making sure it's safe and the copy is good and usable is much harder than people I think it is.
It really is. And, we've been up at the PAS museum, and we've talked with those folks there, and it's just the software, I mean, all the aspects of it. But the one cool thing at KU that's happening right now is that it's actually brought this project. I had no idea. There are other special collections at KU. I mean, we apparently have a bug collection that's like really well known. I don't know. But so they're now looking at the university of saying, oh, look, these are our unique collections. Maybe we should put these all together and have one sort of website that people can know about this. And then, you're going to go to the marimba collection or the Center for Mallet Percussion. But on that same web page, there's also the fancy bug collection or whatever else is out there, because I think that's what the university can offer that is harder for an organization to do that doesn't have the infrastructure. Universities are set up for academic development. So
yeah, man, this has been, I tell you what, I know Ben's geeked out quite a bit in the past hour, but yeah, this has been one of the more enlightening, cool content episodes I think I've heard in a while. Of course,
awesome, huh?
And I apologize to everyone listening for my just rapid train of thought derailing constantly.
Hey,
I just have so many things I'm excited about.
You remember when I was the host in the first 5 minutes of the show, and then Ben took it over?
And then Ben brought up the Musser possible affair.
He went on the Musser. He's high on Musser.
Cool. It's cool. I mean, and the funny thing is that, we have all this stuff, and I have no intention of being the be all end all of this information, because it's in development. And that's the thing, you talked about working with Bill. I love Bill. He and I played together in a couple gigs in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and his knowledge, Dana Kimball, who's helped us get this started, David Eiler up in Minnesota. I mean, like so many people have little pieces of information. Mike Lorenz up in Milwaukee. I mean, Daniel Squires. I mean, there's all these people that have all of this pieces of information. I'm hoping if there's anything that I can do for our Center for Mallet Percussion is really to bring all of those kind of folks together and really be the sort of resource for all of that. I mean, it's just, because we don't all know the complete story, but we know some of the stuff, and I think hopefully by putting all of our things together, we can create the complete story.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. We're marimba is now, or mallet percussion in general, is now getting old enough that we do actually have a history. It's not the beginning anymore. And I think for so many modern students, marimba history starts with Lee Howard Stevens or Lee and Gordon, or Lee Gordon and Bill.
Right.
And it's not a knock on those guys. It's just it's much older than that. There was a lot of stuff at the beginning of the 20th century, and we think of the 5-octave marimba as being premiered in 1984 or something like that, and it existed a long time before that, and then it went away, and then it came back. So yeah, it's fascinating to hear all this.
And I've played and worked with Israel Moreno in Mexico, and we're talking about publishing his dissertation, because his dissertation is extensive on the marimba in South America and Mexico, and we need to incorporate that right now. We used to have we've had a great luck with not having instruments getting stolen, but our Mexican marimba got stolen, believe it or not. I mean, it was on loan to a group in Philadelphia, and somehow somebody took it and it's gone. So it's not just about the marimba as we know it, but we want to make it a global and kind of a center for that instrument, the keyboard percussion. It's Center for Mallet Percussion Research, not just marimba as we know it. And Lee has been exceptionally supportive of our events. He's been here, Vida Chenoweth's family has helped us with getting her stuff. And it's just, the list is just amazing that we're just so fortunate that people recognize that we're going to have the distribution ability for it. And I think that's really the key. And that's what I wanted. I want it to be open for everybody. So back to the original question of my vision, that's the vision. I want, for anybody who's interested in it to be able to come and just get what they want without restriction.
Wow. Thanks so much again.
So fun. It's been fun for me.
Thanks so much, Frank, for hanging out and giving us your time. Thanks, Ben, for being here, of course. Obligated.
Absolutely.
So before I forget, big thanks to Brian Nosney. If you're not watching online, he had to slip away a little bit ago for a gig. So thanks again, Brian, for hanging out with us, and we'll catch y'all on the next one.